Very good. So we have 2 hours together this evening, and we're going to cover a lot of material. Next slide, please, Reham. To make tonight go smoothly, I have a few requests. So as a facilitator, it helps if you keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking. And we hope that we can focus on the agenda. When you speak, introduce yourself, which I didn't do. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Sophie Glass, and I'm a facilitator with Triangle Associates. And I have been with the Roundtable since its beginning several years before. If you have a disagreement, share the reasons why you disagree, and let's have a productive conversation. And then lastly, be patient with internet and our Zoom interpretation, and stay on the meeting after we end to give me and my team feedback. So next slide, please. Some tips for using Zoom. If you've just joined, please select which language you prefer to listen in by clicking on the globe and choosing whichever language you prefer to listen in. Keep yourself on mute with the little microphone, and you can use the chat button and raise hand feature. Great. Next slide, please. For everyone, please speak slowly. This supports the interpreters, Carla and James and Tammy. And everyone, try to avoid acronyms. That helps everybody. And use common language whenever possible. Next slide, please. So I see some new faces tonight. Can you use the raise hand feature if this is your first Roundtable meeting? Let me see. Raise your hand. Christian raised their hand. Looking for other ones. Blair, Leon, Kathy, Jay Tellman. Welcome, welcome, welcome. The Roundtable is organized into caucuses, as you see on the screen. If you are coming tonight for the first time and you want to get more involved and join a caucus, please email or call Annalise. Annalise, can you put your contact information in the chat? If you are an observer here tonight, there will be time at the end for observer and public comment, and we welcome you to join them. And I want to note at the top of this diagram is the EPA, who is the convener of this group. And we have 2 new members, 2 new EPA team members that I'd like to introduce. Laura and Mishak, do you want to come on camera and say hello very briefly?
Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Laura Knudsen, and I am a community involvement coordinator with the Environmental Protection Agency. And it's an honor to be here this evening and share this space with all of you. And I very much look forward to meeting all of you and working with you on this project. And I have been working at EPA since 2010 in Superfund community involvement. And I have a background in toxicology, risk assessment, and public affairs. And I want to quickly introduce my colleague, Mishak Padilla, who is also an EPA community involvement coordinator, who will be joining me in supporting the community involvement work on this site moving forward. Mishak?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mishak Badia, and like Laura, I'm also very excited to be here today. I'm fairly new to the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, about 8 months now, but I'm eager and excited to work with this community. And this is my first roundtable meeting as well for some of you. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you all have to say, and thank you.
Thank you, Mishak and Laura. Can you put your contact information in the chat? Great. So welcome to the roundtable, everyone, if it is your first or fifth meeting. And we'll go to the next slide. The purpose of today's meeting is to learn about EPA's progress in further defining areas of the upper reach, which is actually the lower portion of the river, to be cleaned up and to identify and share initial questions, concerns, or ideas. Next slide, please. Today's agenda was developed in coordination with the steering committee. So I would like to thank James Rasmussen, Soporn Sim, and Jonathan Hall for helping us create a meeting tonight that will hopefully be a good use of your time. So thank you. We are going to begin with presentations from EPA and others, and then based off your request to have more time together, have a longer breakout where you join different caucuses. That will be an opportunity to think about EPA's presentation and how what you've learned might affect you and your community. We will have observer comments and questions. So if you're new and you're observing for the first time, we'd love to hear from you. And we will wrap up by 7:30. We will stay, I as a facilitator will stay on after the meeting, and you can tell me what worked or didn't work for you, especially with the language interpretation. Very good. So as a reminder of where we left off at the last meeting, last time we talked about the East Waterway, which is part of a different Superfund site, and we got updates on the Lower Duwamish Waterway. Today, we will really focus on the Lower Duwamish Waterway. Next slide, please. We already did introductions, and Ellie, I'll let you introduce yourself when you begin your presentation. So next slide, please. I got ahead of myself. So I mentioned caucuses. Each caucus has a lead, and each caucus has an interest group, meaning a shared interest and a shared shared way of being affected by the cleanup. Next slide, please. I got off script. Thank you again to the steering committee. Next slide, please. So before we talk about the first agenda item having to do with the ground rules, I want to acknowledge that the media is here in attendance tonight. So in addition to having this meeting be recorded, there is a member of the media with us here. Very good. Okay. So at your last meeting, we tried breakout rooms. And it worked in some ways, and it was hard in other ways. And so the steering committee presents some potential ground rules for the caucus breakout rooms. And I will share these with you now for your consideration. So the first is that the purpose of the caucus breakouts is to have caucus members talk with each other. And there's no guarantee of confidentiality though, because this is a public meeting. The second is that it is best to stay in your own caucus unless you've been invited to visit another one. If you do choose to visit a caucus that is not your own, we ask that you stay in listening mode and leave if requested. And caucuses, if you can choose a note taker and a facilitator, that will make your session go smoother. You can also ask Triangle, so myself or my colleagues Riham Hashi, to serve as a facilitator for you during your breakout. So I will pause and see for roundtable members, do you have any suggestions or feedback with these new ground rules having to do with caucus breakouts? No? Okay. We can try them out tonight and see how it goes. So with that, Ellie, I will turn it over to you. And for those who are new tonight, may you begin your presentation with a brief introduction of who you are. Next slide, please, Riham. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ellie Hale. I am the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency project manager, and my job is to oversee the cleanup work at the Lower Duwamish Superfund site. It's a 5-mile waterway, and I started working at EPA in 1988, but I started working at the Lower Duwamish Waterway site in 2015. I'm going to update you tonight very briefly on some topics and in a little more detail on others. Next slide, please, Riham. I'm going to talk about the upper reach first. This is an aerial photograph, and if you know your neighborhood well, you'll know that the Green River flows from the bottom of the screen into the upper reach, through the middle reach, through the lower reach, and then it splits and goes on either side of Harbor Island into Elliott Bay. So the little tiny map in the corner shows where we are in terms of Seattle, downtown Seattle. But in the upper reach, we're dealing with the contamination there first because it's upstream, and that's a logical way to progress from like painting a room. You always want to have the last bit at the doorway. So next screen, please. We started work on the upper reach design. So there is a cleanup plan already from 2014. We are working on the upper reach design, and we've spent a few years gathering data to show us exactly where we need to do exactly what kind of cleanup. So the update is about the results of our additional sampling, data collection, and where we go next. Next slide, please. So this is a complicated process, and there are lots of technical documents you might enjoy reading. I do, but not everybody does. But this helps, this slide is to show you how we end up with a different cleanup area at the end of our pre-design investigations. We take samples of the mud or sediment And on this slide, somebody called it soil, but that's okay because it's like dirt that's underwater. So we take samples and we have in our cleanup plan levels of contamination that require cleanup. And so we measure the samples and compare them to the levels that require cleanup. And we define cleanup areas. And it's a little bit like looking at a mountain from afar, and it looks like everything's green. It's just one big green thing. And as you get closer, you get more definition. You go, oh, there's green meadows and there's green trees. And then when you get closer, you can say, oh, this area has yellow flowers and this area has pine trees. So as we get closer and more detail, our estimation of the areas will change. So the map here is just to show that we are going to be making decisions about what areas need cleanup. And next slide, please, Rihan. So the record of decision, our cleanup plan, says we did a study. We have a pretty good idea of what the problems are. Here's what we think needs to be done. So it's like a roadmap. After we do the sampling and testing, we have more detail. And so we have a data evaluation report. And in fact, one is in review right now. And that will show us the more recent information we gathered to find exactly where cleanup is needed. Then we move on to engineering design. And that is where we prepare for contractors to do work. So we draw straight lines and we set clear boundaries so that we can make sure that work is done simply and correctly. Next slide. So the red dot shows where we are in the upper reach. We have completed 2 years of sampling, and we are now reporting the results of all the sampling that has been done so far. And we will start design. And in fact, in August, we will see the very first round, the first example of the upper reach design at a very simple level. It's called the 30% design because it's just getting clear. And as we progress, we will get more and more detail in the engineering part.
Ellie,
Go ahead.
Can I ask, is the interpreters, is the pace okay?
I think I know the answer.
Thank you, carry on.
Okay. We expect that the design in the upper reach will be finished by the end of next year, which is, for me, very exciting because the next step is cleanup. Next slide, Riham, please. This is a closer view of the upper reach. And I am used to seeing this map, so I know where I am, but it's sometimes hard to tell. But if you look closely, you see that there are things on the sides called slips, and they're old pieces of the Duwamish River that didn't get filled in. When we started the upper reach, we knew that it might be an easier part of the river to study and clean up because many areas of the upper reach have already been cleaned up. We have Terminal 117, and we have Jorgensen Forge, which is continuing. We have most of Boeing Plant 2. So there are many areas that are already clean, and we have simpler conditions. We have one depth that we have to obey for our sampling and our cleanup in the navigation channel. There's some areas that have had habitat restoration, so they're clean. And so we think that we'll have smaller areas and less complication for the upper reach. Next slide, please. we initially, in the record of decision, we have a map on something called Figure 18, and it has orange and green and blue areas where active cleanup is shown. Like I said, that's the view of the mountain from far away. We are still refining and making exact areas, and the design will be information that tells the contractors where they should do what work. I'm repeating myself, but that's okay. Next slide, please. So this map was a little dim on my screen, but this is from the new data evaluation report. And it shows the refined outlines based on the data and shows where we now think cleanup areas will be, cleanup is needed. So the engineering will enclose these areas and make sure that they are cleaned up. You might want to look closely at that, but for your bearings, there's the upper reach starts at River Mile 3 next to Duwamish Waterway Park. And it passes parts of South Park. And there are many commercial and industrial facilities. So next slide, please. The data evaluation report also went through a process of saying, in this location, the ROD says we dredge or pick up the contamination. In this location, the ROD says we can use enhanced natural recovery. So the maps in this report show a preliminary, a start of an understanding of what actions will happen in these orange areas based on the data we have collected. Did I say ROD? Record of decision, that is my bad. So this also is from the data evaluation report. And between the two pink lines is what is called the Federal Navigation Channel. And in the south end of the upper reach, the Corps of Engineers routinely dredges out clean sediments in the channel. And this helps reduce the amount of sediment going downstream and filling in the channel there. Next slide, please. So you'll see that some parts of the navigation channel may need to be dredged. And when we work in the navigation channel, we need to make sure that if we can, we dredge all of the contaminated material out. But if it's too deep, we can put a cap, a sediment cap above the contamination, as long as the sediment cap is below a depth that could be affected by the Corps of Engineers dredging. In other words, when the Corps is dredging to keep the channel at the right depth, we don't want them to break through our sediment cover or cap and into contaminated material below that. So that's an important part of the design too. Next slide. So I really want you to start thinking about what your neighborhood and what your waterway might look like during construction, because there are boats and barges and tugs, and there are special equipment to transfer material to the shore and then put it on trains. So I'm hoping you'll be looking at these maps and thinking about where you are physically in the landscape, and think about, is there a structure there that you know about that we've missed? Is there a place that you like to go into the water and put your boat in that would be affected by that? There are lots of ways that construction can temporarily disrupt your life. I think I haven't slowed down at all, have I? Sorry. Next slide, please. I'll try to slow down. So the next slides are not all from the upper reach, but I just wanted to illustrate that when we do work, we have to work around existing active businesses, and sometimes we have to get under or in tight places. Next slide. There might be structures. We don't want to damage those structures like a dock or a pier, certainly not a big bridge. And so we are going to be looking at the condition of the structures and make sure that we don't damage them, partly to protect our own safety. We have workers and we don't want things to fall on their heads. Next. Depending on the need, sometimes work happens at night. This is a photograph from another cleanup closer to Elliott Bay that involves some night dredging. And night dredging has lights and can be noise at a time when you want quiet. So I want to make you think about that. Next slide, please. And sometimes when we do the cleanup, we create short-term impacts, like we might remove a tree or a bush that you have planted or have an attachment to. I feel deeply that that can happen. You want to save all the trees, but if they are in the way, sometimes we have to remove them to do the work. And they are in aid of benefits over the long term. This is from some work in another part of the Duwamish, this picture. Next slide. There might be opportunities that we haven't thought about for making the river better without increasing cleanup costs or through coordination with other programs. I'm showing this picture because you'll all be excited to see that the Terminal 117 cleanup is going to open this year with a new habitat and plants, and it has public access and viewing and fishing piers. So they really thought about what does the community need, and maybe there are other ways we can find good opportunities. Next slide, please. We work with the property owners and operators on the shoreline to reduce impacts. Next slide, please. So that's the upper reach, but now we are also at the very beginning of the middle reach process. And that reach is not as long as the upper reach, but it's more complicated. There are 3 different depths at the navigation channel that the Corps of Engineers maintains. There are more active structures and docks and things that we have to work around or work with. There are fewer areas that were cleaned up during the study and before today. There are fewer habitat areas, and it's not far from some of the residents of South Park who live on the banks. It may also have higher contamination levels, but we'll find out through testing. There are lots of upland, on land cleanup sites that are needing to be cleaned up also. And in fact, the channel hasn't been dredged here for a while. So there's lots going on. Next slide, please. So again, this picture is from the record of decision, and we don't know how the areas will change after we do another pre-design investigation with more sampling in this area, just the same as the upper reach. But when we sample, we will keep you posted because we'll find out where and exactly what needs to be cleaned up. Next slide, please. So like the upper reach, there will be at least 2 seasons of sampling and testing, and then design. And in fact, the sampling plan is expected in May. Next slide. I know people may still be interested in an update on the Earl M. Jorgensen facility. And last summer, many of you sent comments on our proposed work to finish the cleanup. This is an area that had some cleanup work done, but to really finish it requires additional work. So we received a lot of comments, and as a result, we are going to come for another round of public comment. That means that the report that had, I think, 4 alternatives or 4 choices to fix the problems that we're seeing that need to be finished, there are now 6 alternatives, or there will be when we come to you to comment. So I just wanted to give you a heads up, and that's on the next slide too. Yeah, that's really, sorry, Riham, can you go back one? The Jorgensen Forge facility includes a lot of upland buildings on land, and you might have seen them. They're sort of pink buildings with pipes, and that part of the site is not EPA's part of the site. The Department of Ecology, the state partner in the cleanup here, is overseeing cleanup of the upland part of this site, this Jorgensen Forge site. So our portion is the part that is in water. Next slide. So you can look forward to a comment period sometime this year, and I'm not sure exactly when, but we will have probably additional outreach, a fact sheet, possibly a meeting, and so stay tuned. Thank you. And the next slide is just a picture of that facility. I think this is an older picture, but the background shows that telltale pink tube. It's very interesting to look at. Next slide. And this is a beautiful madrona tree, and hopefully it's not in the way of a cleanup process. We don't know. It's not from the upper reach. That's all the slides I have, and I think I might have nailed the time. How'd that happen? Okay.
You're good, Ellie.
All right. I hope I didn't go too fast. Thanks, everyone.
Riham, can you go back to slide 13, please? Okay. Ellie covered a lot about the upper reach, the area in green, and she talked a little about the middle reach, the area in yellow, and then she talked about Jorgensen Forge, small area on this map. You will have time in groups to talk with each other about what you heard, but maybe you have some questions first. So let's begin with questions about the upper reach, that green area. Any questions for Ellie Hale on what you heard? Okay. Ellie then talked about the middle reach, the area in yellow, and what's happening there. Questions for Ellie about the middle reach. We see a question in the chat from Paco. Thank you, Paco. How long will the neighborhood cleanup process take?
Paco, I'm not sure I understand what the neighborhood cleanup means. Can you clarify that?
Sí, me refiero a que,
Yes.
a que ella comentó que va a haber mucho ruido, mucha maquinaria cerca del río.
So, Carla, sí, puedo oír a Paco y su pregunta. Bueno,
Yes.
And if anyone couldn't hear Carla, you have to select English with the little globe. But our interpreter, Carla, clarified that Paco was asking about the impacts of light and noise on the community.
And how long might it take?
Yeah.
So one thing about the work in the Duwamish is that we have to do it when it's safe for the baby salmon coming downstream. So there's a time of year when we can't do work. So our work season is sometimes even shorter than 6 months long out of a year. And it's usually in the fall and winter. So the time it will take to do the cleanup will depend on the design and the amount of cleanup to do. But I would guess that this is 2 years of 6 months at a time work in the winter.
Thank you. We have 2 more extra items I want to cover before the break. So I'll just see if there's any last questions for now. We're going to come back together in a bit and ask more questions. Any last questions? No.
ខ្ញុំចង់សួរថារយៈពេល clean up តាំងពី lower reach middle reach upper reach មានរយៈពេលប្រហែលឆ្នាំ ហើយឧបមាថា clean up រួចរាល់តើយើងអាចនេសាទដូចជាក្តាមដូចជាអីគឺផលនេសាទដែលមកពីសមុទ្រហ្នឹងអនុញ្ញាតឲ្យក្រោយពី clean up ហ្នឹងអាចនេសាទបានយកមកញ៉ាំហ្នឹងប្រហែលឆ្នាំក្រោយបានអាចនេសាទយកផលនេសាទហ្នឹងមកញ៉ាំបាន
Yes. Go ahead, James. Can you interpret? Yeah.
That's a complicated question with a little complicated answer. I'll start with how long will it take? We estimated in the cleanup plan that it would take 7 years of fall and winter construction work to do the whole river. But there are things that have to happen before we can do some of that work. And so it may not be 7 years starting in 2024, it may be 3 years and a gap and 2 years and a gap. So all in all, there will be 7 years when there is construction, we think. So we are going to learn more with every piece of design work that we do. So as we learn more, we will tell the public all about that. The question about fishing, I want to say that the cleanup is intended to reduce contamination in the mud, and by doing that, to reduce contamination in the fish and in the crabs and in the clams. We don't know how clean it will get for sure for those fish and seafood things. So we will monitor, we will sample, and we will make sure that before you are allowed to fish, it is safe. But in truth, it will never be 100% fish all you like, eat all you like. We can't get that clean. In fact, Elliott Bay and many other places just can't get that clean. So that's a long explanation to say, we will tell you when it is safer to eat, but I don't think we will ever say you can eat as much as you like for your safety.
Thank you. Ellie, we have one comment in the chat that I would like you to respond to, and then we need to move on. So in the chat, there was an article that said EPA is attempting to water down the standards of testing that would trigger a cleanup. Specifically, 7 times more, I think it's BAP, benzoapyrene, but BPAs, being allowed between a study in 2007 and 2021. Can you comment on that, please, Ellie?
EPA finalized a cleanup decision change last fall after a period of public comment and lots of discussion. So that decision has been made, but Sophie is our county representative here.
Yes, perfect segue.
Thank you. I think I'll just pass it off to you.
Yes, Jim Bolger, are you here? Can you come on screen and share your announcement?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Bolger. I'm a manager for the King County Wastewater Treatment Division, and I'm here on behalf of the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group, which is comprised of King County, the City of Seattle, the Port of Seattle, and the Boeing Company. Our 4 entities have been working closely with EPA in the investigation and design and sampling work that's been going on in the Lower Duwamish Waterway. Today, I would like to share with participants of the roundtable an update on some of the work that the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group is undertaking. The group appreciates the input we've received from the community regarding the Environmental Protection Agency's updated action levels for carcinogenic, polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons, or shortened to PAHs. These are a group of chemicals and compounds that are known or probably carcinogenic to humans. The scientific understanding of the risks from a particular toxin can change as more scientific studies are done, including evidence that shows that risks are lower than previously thought. We support the Environmental Protection Agency's updated scientific understanding of these CPAHs, these groups of chemicals, and the toxicity. However, we also recognize that some members of the community did not support the change to the CPAH action levels and cleanup level in the 2014 Record of Decision. To address these concerns, the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group will voluntarily include in the design for the upper and middle reaches of the waterway additional cleanup actions for the areas where CPAHs are above the original remedial action level. We strongly support public involvement in the cleanup of the Lower Duwamish Waterway and look forward to working in partnership with the community to reach our common goal of protecting the environment and the health of the community. There is a full statement of what I just paraphrased on the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group website, and I will post a link to the complete statement in the chat. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Jim. I think that's a good note to take a break on. We are going to come back and explain breakout groups and hear a recommendation from the resource members about how to work with them. So it is 6:19. Come back at 6:24. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. See you at 6:24. So Riham, can you go to slide 11, please? So we got a response from BJ with the University of Washington. BJ asked, in addition to caucus members initiating a visit to another caucus group, can caucuses invite or request a member of another caucus? As a member of the resource group caucus, which is government agencies and universities, they are available to join everyone by request. Does anyone have issues with caucuses inviting resource members to join them? If you have an issue with this, please raise your hand. Okay. Well, Dat Nguyen on our team is taking notes. Dat, can you please add this as another ground rule and outcome of today's meeting? Thank you, Dat. So now, Riham, can you please go back to slide 5? In a few moments, we are going to divide up into caucuses. In your meeting packet, there is a list of all the caucuses and who they represent. Page 10, page 8 and 9. Oh, you can't see. But I'll read them aloud and explain briefly so you all know where to go. We have a caucus for government agencies that are known as potentially responsible parties: Seattle Public Utilities and King County Wastewater Treatment Division and the Port of Seattle. We have a caucus for government agencies, local government, that are not listed as a potentially responsible party. So that's the Duwamish Valley Program, King County, Seattle Public Health, and others. We have a caucus for the fishers. We have not caucuses, but seats for anyone from the Suquamish tribe, the Yakima Nation, and the Muckleshoot tribe. We have resource members, as BJ mentioned. These are experts among us who can support you and EPA in its discussions. We have a group for recreational river users, people who paddle or sail or play. The Duwamish River Community Coalition is the official community advisory group for this site. James Rasmussen is here from that group. They have a caucus. Then other community-based organizations collectively, if they want, have a caucus. And the Duwamish River Accountability Group, or DRAG, has a caucus. Finally, We have businesses. Businesses that are not potentially responsible parties. So small businesses that aren't involved, and then businesses that are potentially responsible parties, so involved with the cleanup. Whew. So those are your choices. That is those are the members. And so in a moment, we are going to break up into these groups, and you will have the ability to choose what group to go into. But fishers, don't do anything. Fishers need to stay in the main room for the interpretation to work. James mentions that anyone is welcome to join the Duwamish River Community Coalition's room. So here are 3 rules. Rule number 1, if you are a fisher, don't do anything. Rule number 2, if you want to join a caucus, you may select it in a moment. And rule number 3, if you do not want to join a caucus, join a room called networking. Okay, can we launch the breakouts? Oh, before launching the breakouts, I want to be very clear about your questions. I'm going to share my screen now. Sorry, Riham. In your meeting packet on page 11 is this map. The areas in red, as Ellie said, are the areas with the most active cleanup. We ask that all of the caucuses have a conversation looking at this map, and everyone have a discussion about, besides removing contaminated materials, do you see opportunities where cleanup could enhance the Lower Duwamish Waterway? And the second question, do you have any concerns about these areas in pink being slated for active construction and cleanup? Caucus leads have some additional questions in their packet to use. Each caucus should choose a note taker and a facilitator, or you may ask me or Riham to join you. So with that, I will ask that we launch the breakouts. So can you please launch the breakout? And we will ask that you come back at 7 p.m. So just under 30 minutes. See in the chat. So Ellie notes, please note that these areas will be enclosed within areas that are based on engineering. So this map will continue to change. Okay. So Dat, are you ready to launch the breakouts?
I believe Annalise has the power.
Annalise, you have the power. Can you please launch the breakout rooms, Annalise?
Yes, and I'm going to pause the recording now as well.
This meeting is being recorded.
One of the major issues that we came up with and kept repeating with many of the members had to do with the homeless encampments around the river. We know about this around the First Avenue Street Bridge, especially on the west side of the bridge, and others that, on the east side of the bridge, we have this wonderful facility that is supposed to take out an awful lot of contamination that has been going into the river. But on the other side of the river, we have homeless encampments that are putting contaminants right back into the river without any control at all. And so that becomes a major issue with the people who actually live around the river and see these things. Also, the opportunity for green jobs. And that's one of the things as we move into the engineering part and the opportunity for locals to be involved with this cleanup becomes very, very important. So I would look at EPA and responsible parties to be able to come up with the right time and the right way, be able to look at maybe the Superfund, the jobs initiative, where people can be involved from the area. Now, we're also talking about CBDEQ, which is the rubber in the tires around the river, which has been found to be a major contributor to decline in salmon. And this is something when we started this process that we were looking at. Are we looking at it today? That is something that I've heard from many different people in the community that they're very concerned about. Also, understanding our role. And when I say that, how can we be as effective as possible in this process? Just as I heard you say, Sophie, all of these smaller groups, dividing us into smaller groups does not make us effective. How can we be more effective? And I'm getting there. Dredging, capping, and how these decisions are going to be made. Obviously, yes, the record of decision is part of that, but there's a whole engineering process that we're going to be going through. How can we be effective in that process? In other words, is there an opportunity to take everything out if there's another foot to go? You know, as far as dredging is concerned in the upper third. Source control. That whole big issue of source control is something that people still have questions about. And the more we can identify what's being done and how people can be involved with that is important. The other part, that for so many different things, there are different numbers to call. And we're all siloed into those different numbers. If there's one thing going on, you call this number. If there's another thing going on, there's another number. How do we make sure we can be effective in reporting issues on the river? And then the intersectionality of all of this, especially where the King County International Airport is concerned, that you know, there's fueling going on, there's all kinds of issues going on in the airport, and that directly affects the cleanup of the Duwamish River and source control. So those are some of the highlights. And I apologize, Sophie, if there was something I left out. I would ask anybody in my group, you know, if they wanted to reiterate or say something about that.
Well, we can come back to your group at the end if you left. Oh, I'll slow down. We can come back to your group at the end if you left anything out. But I want to hear from the recreational river users now. 2-3 minutes. Would anyone like to report out?
No? All right, this is Kathy Buller, and I'm with the Duwamish Rowing Club. And also in our group was Leon Nien. Leon, would you like to go first?
Yeah, maybe you should go first, so I can like back you up.
Okay,
So
I'll
you
be
can start
brief.
out. Yeah.
In this context, I have a real laser focus on the rowing club's interests. So to be very brief, we are concerned with maintaining beach access and sediment and water and air quality at the Duwamish Waterway Park access point. That's our only access point for the rowing club's activities. We are active usually between March and October or November of each year. So we also appreciate advance notice to coordinate when there might be barge or other work activity along different stretches of the river, because we can usually navigate around that or take breaks. And I'll stop there. That's the gist of it. Leon, your other points?
Okay, so hi, my name is Leon Nguyen. I'm with the CHA group. I'm a new member. This is my first time on the round table, so I wasn't sure what group I was choosing. So I happened with the Recreational group. So my main point is just like, if we could consistently clean the river, so that way the contamination or toxic won't reproduce again. That's all my main point. So then if the water clean, the fish, the animal, the crab, the crab, and the water is safe, then not only is it for the boat that can go out there, and then also for people that we can go there for swim and have fun on the beach. Thank you.
Thank you to the recreational river users. Turning to the government that are not identified as potentially responsible parties.
Oh, thanks, Sophie. My name is Alberto Rodriguez. I work for the city's Office of Sustainability and Environment. And I had the pleasure to talk with my colleagues from Public Health, Seattle, King County, Julie West and Shirley Tan. We have a question, a couple of recommendations, and more of a heads up of upcoming changes in the area that may be pertinent to this conversation. In terms of the question, we are wondering if we have thought, it wasn't clear from what the conversation earlier today, if we have thought about specific mitigation measures for noise pollution. Should I keep going, Sophie?
Let's have Ellie, can you answer that first, and then he can continue?
At this point, I think that would be later in the designs, but it's good to hear now so that we can build it in before you see the design instead of after. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ellie. A couple of recommendations are, we're wondering if it's, we're not wondering, we recommend that we develop a process to file and respond any complaints in a timely manner. I think a little bit related to noise, but beyond noise. And we're wondering if there's a possibility to have kind of like a live website where there's like updates on the work, and maybe it's a website where people can send their questions related to the project. And lastly, this is an observation and a heads up on upcoming changes. We noticed that the biggest portion of the active cleanup areas are actually really close to the residential areas of the neighborhood of South Park and several river access points. Most of the areas will be dredged, but there we see that number 1, number 2, number 3, more specifically number 1 and number 3 up in the northern portion of the river are slated to be dredged and capped. Our observation is that exactly where the fishing symbol will be is the Duwamish Waterway Park. Adjacent to it, the city has acquired that site. It's called Unity Electric. And we're actually currently doing site planning, and we believe that the community will prioritize expanding the Duwamish Waterway Park, expanding river access, and siting a building for community supportive services. So we're expecting in the next few years that there will be more activity and need for accessing the water. And that exactly, those two sites is where we're seeing the proposal for dredging and capping. So we just wanted to give you all a heads up, and wondering if there's an opportunity to dredge all the pollution or not. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Alberto. Let's now go to the business, potentially responsible parties. Jonathan, is that you or someone else?
Oh, I think that is me, Sophie. Thank you. We had a good conversation. There was 5 of us in the group this evening. We started talking about the sampling process from 2 different perspectives. There's a fair amount of concern about sampling, and what I think I interpreted as sampling of sort of upland areas. I've taken a note to make a follow-up call myself on that, make sure I understand a little bit better, and I'll pass that on to you. The other bit
Jonathan,
was,
do you want to slow down just a little bit?
Sure, yep. The other prong to the sampling process was related to additional sampling that may happen or will likely happen as the design process matures, and whether we can maybe hear a bit more about that, with a specific concern to when that will complete. There are certain businesses that believe that the details of what happens in their particular portion of the river will be impacted, or may be impacted differently as the sampling continues and matures. And so trying to understand when that moving target will stop moving. The other question in that first block of questions that we had is linked to the fact that we understand there is a process for maintaining the navigational channel. There's some requirements linked to, I think, that the Army Corps of Engineers has. And we're curious of what the process for individual businesses would be in terms of maintaining the navigable access to their docks and dolphins and things like that. So if you can navigate the river, but you can't get to the end location that you're going, navigating the river isn't all that useful. So wanting to make sure that there's a process for that. We had a concern about congestion, particularly in the roadways along the Duwamish River as cleanup happens. I think there was a vision that there could end up being a lot of trucks moving equipment and material in and out of a particular area of the river, and how that might impact both the businesses and the residents in that area. And in terms of the third question we talked about, I think we're just concerned about continuing the navigation of the waterway in general.
Thank you, Jonathan. I want to read aloud a quote before we finish with the government PRPs. In the chat, BJ Cummings with the UW Superfund Research Program said, "As design proceeds near residential areas, the type of dredging will become very important to consider. We've seen a range of dredging technologies and expertise on the Duwamish with varying levels of spillage. Well-executed environmental dredging will be critical to limiting spillage and exposures for residents and fishers in the river in this reach. So thank you. Okay, lastly, the government entities that are potentially responsible parties. Joanna, can I turn to you?
Yes. Hello. I also just wanted to point out too that our caucus also includes WashDOT and the city of Tukwila. They didn't have any representatives today, so everybody in our caucus today was the city, the port, and the county. So looking at the questions, with removing contaminated materials, opportunities where cleanup could directly enhance the Duwamish. We see that there could be opportunities to improve the shoreline for areas that are being cleaned up. So if something has a dilapidated structure or failing bulkhead, that could be improved when it's rebuilt after the contamination is removed. As far as concerns, we did not have any concerns. As for let's see, where do our questions go here? Oh, keep in mind in terms of use of the navigation channel, we were unsure of what that question was trying to get at.
Okay.
And then for our other specific question regarding what we should inform the roundtable members of at future meetings. We don't have anything specific at this time, but did want to remind people that there will be communication plans and more outreach as the design process gets further along and also before construction begins. And that's it.
Thank you, Joanna. Before we move to comments and announcements, Ellie, can you answer the question in the chat? Who is responsible for contracting the dredging and who will be developing the construction contract?
I don't think we know that. The work that is construction will be managed by whoever has sort of a lead role as a settling party, a party that has signed a legal agreement with EPA. So there can't be any construction work for the Lower Duwamish Waterway ROD, Record of Decision, until we have a legal agreement with the parties to do that work. That has to happen in the next couple of years, I think. Did I answer that question?
Yes, I think so. And forgive me, I saved the Fishers Caucus for last, but they are not least. So Annalise, as their facilitator, would you or someone else like to share out from the Fishers Caucus?
I would be happy to give a quick summary, unless anyone else wants to do so. Hearing none, and anyone can add to what I summarize here. So we heard a number of questions from members of the Fishers Caucus about whether fishing sites will still be accessible during cleanup. In particular, the CHAs, the community health advocates, do a lot of in-person outreach at fishing sites. That's a way that they get information to community members. And so they are concerned that if fishing sites are completely closed off during construction, they want to know how they will reach people who they usually talk to at those sites. And there was an interest in potentially partnering with agencies like King County Metro to provide transportation to alternative fishing sites during cleanup, because multiple people said that they would probably not like to fish at sites nearby where construction is happening, because it just wouldn't be fun or nice of an experience. So there was an idea of looking for alternative sites and ways for community members to reach those sites. And there were a couple of questions about salmon and other fish passing through the river during cleanup, and whether salmon can be eaten during cleanup, I think was the question. Piper had some other thoughts about that, but I'll stop there and just see if anyone else has clarifications, if that's okay.
Thank you, Annalise. So James, I see your question in the chat. That is, both the city and the county have agreed that the best technology should be used. Will it? Like what was used at Boeing Plant 2 early action site. Ellie, can I ask you to reply in the chat while we just make space for general comments and some final notes? So I want to thank all the caucuses for their great discussion and reporting out. And thank you to my colleague Dat Nguyen for capturing that in the notes for EPA to have as they move forward. Does anyone have any announcements? Either a roundtable member, or if it's your first time here, any announcements?
It was my
oh, go ahead.
And I loved it. Not enough time would be my only note, but everyone is very busy, so I appreciate being a part of it. And I always love learning, and especially learning from the best and people who are equally as passionate. So I hope we can do this all again. And as James mentioned, become one large collective group for the betterment of the river, and really making an effective plan for everyone to get this done as healthily and quickly as possible for everyone. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So last things, Ellie, thank you for your response. She said the specific technologies will be developed in the design, but we are aware that controls and environmentally protective methods are critical. So I have an announcement on behalf of the one and only James Rasmussen, who will be retiring at the end of June. James will always be involved with this cleanup, no matter what his job title is. But James was there to help design and launch the roundtable a few years ago. And so we would not be sitting here without James. Woo! So thank you for all your work, James. We appreciate you. Yeah.
Yay, James!
Yay.
So
Okay. And because we are always trying to improve these meetings, Riham, you have a poll that I'd like you to share that asks you to rate your satisfaction with this meeting. And no matter where you are on that satisfaction, you can send me an email that informs how it can be improved moving forward. About a third of you have participated. Almost a half.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
For future involvement, both in communications and meetings and roundtables like this, and just as a person who cares about the river, what are some future steps, spaces, information spaces that one could go to learn more and be both educationally and physically more involved?
Yeah. So while the poll is going, I will say that the Lower Duwamish Waterway Roundtable will meet again in a few months. And Annalise, if you could get, is it Araya or Araya? I want to pronounce your name correctly.
Araya.
Araya. If you could give Annalise your contact information.
Okay.
There's also Duwamish Alive to be physically involved. In June, there will be during the day, so not as convenient, a technical presentation about what is happening on the cleanup. And if you give us your email, you will find out when that happens. And the Duwamish River Community Coalition is the official community advisory group for this site. So James and Maggie and anyone else can keep you informed about their meetings.
Thank you so much. What was the, you mentioned Lower Duwamish?
Waterway Roundtable was the first. And then, yeah. And then Duwamish Alive. And then we'll have for a stakeholders meeting, we call it, which is really just a webinar in June.
Cool. Thank you. And yes, I've worked with the DRCC and I adore them. So I look forward to doing that with you too.
Good.
I will also put in 2 cents for a very well-organized website, and it's not EPA's, but it is the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group's page that has all the final technical reports from the beginning, from the remedial investigation. So if you want to look at all the work that has come before and what is ongoing and has been, when the data evaluation report is finalized, it will be posted there. It's on ldwg.org.
ldwg.org.
Just put it in the chat. And so
I appreciate that.
yeah. So to end, it seems like you were all either neutral, satisfied, or very satisfied. Thank you. And we're going to have 15 minutes at the end of this meeting. And I would like, if you can, if you were in the if you use the interpretation, just to stay for 1 minute to let me know how it went, because this was our first time using Zoom interpretation. So Ellie, can I have you say the last word?
My mute is not on. That's good. My last word is fantastic. What a great meeting, and what a pleasure to talk to all of you and to hear you talk amongst yourselves and know that this process is going forward with public involvement at a high level. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Yeah.
And Yahoo, James.
Yes. Congratulations, James. Best wishes.
Yes.
Woo-hoo.
So thank you. Anyone can stay for the next 15 minutes to give feedback, but especially on interpretation. So thank you everyone for your time tonight. We really appreciate your commitment to this river. We will see you next time in a few months.
Woo-hoo.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.